Welcome everybody to our fourth episode of Maintenance Untangled. As always, crank it up and join us as we continue to untangle this amazing world of maintenance.
Welcome to another episode of Maintenance Untangled, where we untangle the complexities of maintenance.
Warm welcome back. Derick, how we going?
Thanks, Ricky. I'm glad to be back. And so tell me, what are we going to untangle today, Ricky?
Sure thing, Derick. First of all, I think we actually need to again touch on this. Sad to hear there's been a tragic accident at the time of recording at the Port Kembla steelworks. It's heartbreaking to hear about another tragedy so close to another tragedy that's only just occurred in Cobar. So we'll go through that, talk about that. And then obviously with our technical report, I really want to talk about a story I had with a client that I worked with and how they had two different teams working very differently, how one used data and one didn't use data, and how that eventually impacted the long-term strategy for that plant. So
Ricky, at the time of this recording, as you know, there wasn't a lot of information available about the incident. So all we know is that it involved a crane and a steel beam that was dropped. And I think this is a timely reminder for all of the work groups involved with lifting operations, which, in the maintenance world, we do it almost daily, to really be vigilant around lifting, ensure your load is secured, and ensure you and everyone else in the work group remains clear of the load's shadow.
So Derick, when you talk about clear of the load shadow, for those listeners who don't understand, what are you talking about there?
Ricky, so I'll use a previous incident that happened in Australia a couple of years ago as a explanation of the shadow. So it was during construction. A steel beam was lifted with a noose, and please don't, the riggers out there, please don't kill me if I use the wrong terminology, but they basically had a noose around the beam, and they were lifting the beam inside a actual structure. And on the way up, it hit the structure. The beam dislodged out of the rigging, fell down, and it hit another worker outside of the actual lift path. But it hit another worker actually while he was working inside a EWP. Now, that's what I mean with the load shadow, where when you lift load, potentially if it gets hooked, where is it going to fall? It might not be directly downwards, it might be to the side, or when it falls down on the way down, it might hit something and ricochet to a different area. And I think that's important to always make sure that you consider what's that shadow, how big is that area that potentially could be impacted if things go wrong. And I know over many years of being in maintenance, you end up starting to become complacent because you've done a lift a million times and it's easy. And I think it's important to always really, really stay vigilant. It's a silent killer that often, when it goes wrong, goes really wrong and really bad. So
that's a shame to hear. Obviously, you've obviously seen and experienced that firsthand. But is there any tools or any way that anyone could sort of put together a bit of an idea about how big that shadow could be?
I don't think there's a right and a wrong. I think it's for every situation you need to consider, when it falls, where does it fall? So if it's a straight lift in an open area, there's no potential. So normally you'll just grade like a cone down. And typically if it's a mobile crane, you'll go where the mobile boom can basically fall. That's your area, which in shutdown environments become very difficult because it's normally congested and it's very hard to create too big a lift zone, but even in shutdowns, you should really consider that. And really where it becomes important is when there's physical structure in the way and you're lifting through structure and there's potential for hooking. When it bounces, where's it going to go? And there's no, I don't think there's a right and a wrong answer. But I do think people need to, just stop, think, and take a bouncing ball and see where it bounces and know, that's potentially where it can go. Thanks, Ricky. So, Ricky, today we're talking about why data governance matters. Now, Ricky, tell me, why is data management and governance important?
Well, Derick, I'll tell you a little story, and I'll do it through this way because I think it's a good way to get the story across. So, picture this: you're at a mine site. There's Crusher A, Crusher B, and they're managed by two separate teams, right? So we've got Team A and Team B. So obviously, normal crushers, there's day shift, there's night shift, there's a lot of interactions, shutdowns, things break down, etc. However, there are really two key differences between how these two teams operate.
So, Ricky, what is the difference between those two teams? Let's start with Team A.
Sure. So Team A, the trades, they're always busy. When something breaks, they're in there, they're getting it fixed, it's back up and running, there's ore being through the crusher. However, while they're really good at fixing things and keeping the plant running, that's sort of relatively whereabouts it ended. When I sat down...
Hang on, Ricky. That sounds good because that's what you want, isn't it?
Yeah, but then you end up starting with a lot of confusion because when you see the planners sit down and talk to the planners, they've got no idea about what actually needs to happen next week or 4 weeks ahead, 12 weeks ahead, because there's no visibility. There's no data within their CMS to work with. It just was nothing. There was nothing to show. The jobs weren't logged. You didn't know that Crusher A, the motor broke 2 weeks ago. So it was really hard for those guys to really understand what was going on. Sort of think of it as like a ghost town, like an old gold mine ghost town. There was nothing.
So what happens there? What's the outcome?
Well, the outcome is, and this is a real kicker, is a lot of the weight of keeping that crusher running relied on a very few people because they had plant experience. They know the plant, they know the knowledge, and it's on them to basically help the planners, everybody understand what's going on in future with the plant, which is a lot of pressure on those people.
Isn't that a good thing to have experienced people?
It is good to have experienced people. It's what you want, but you want those experienced people to make sure that their knowledge is shared across everybody. That it's not just Joe blogs. Hey, the crusher's broken again on the phone, like you said last week. 2 a.m. in the morning. We don't want that sort of happen because it's not fun for anybody. Nobody can properly rest, recover, go in with a clear head. And it creates a situation where every breakdown becomes a scramble. You've got 30, 40 guys going at this crusher trying to fix it. And you lose time. And you're basically flying blind.
So, Ricky, that sounds familiar. Like I said last week, that sounds like a real challenge. And now tell me, what made Team B different?
Team B really focused on operating like a well-oiled machine. They didn't just fix things, they followed the work management process to a T. The breakdown started in the CMMS. Every detail gets logged. The operations team feel like they're involved with the maintenance strategy, and nothing slipped through the cracks. The planners, they know what's going on. They know what to plan 3, 4, 5, 12 weeks ahead because the data is solid. They know what's coming at. They know as well, very strictly, what uses what part because the trades have gone out there and said, hey, look, can you please update the system because we've replaced the motor with this AC style motor rather than a DC style motor, as an example. The CMS, it told the whole story. Work orders were complete. asset history was awesome, and there were clear trends about certain repeatable failures, and they had things in place to make sure that they didn't happen again.
Ricky, sorry, that sounds a bit like day and night, right? So what's the result for the business with these two teams in reality?
Well, the biggest result difference between Team A and Team B, when we started to put everything together, and obviously me being a data guy, data drives everything, and you see that very common, as you know, Derick, in a lot of modern businesses. Yep. Team B's data-driven approach means that there were fewer breakdowns. The spares were optimized. There were thousands saved in downtime. KPIs were accurate. They weren't firefighting. And obviously it resulted in better forecasting about what maintenance that they needed to do for the forthcoming year. And the biggest thing as well, the reliability engineers were focused on improving the plant, not writing reports and chasing tails on constant breakdowns, which, you know, especially in the world whereabouts there's a lot more AI being in place. Team A was able to then also start to go down the road of AI to help the team balance their workload.
Team B, you mean?
Team B, yes, sorry.
Ricky, so in summary, what would you say, or how would you describe the world of Team A?
Chaos would be the absolute way to do it. Not fun to be around, and the morale of the team was just like, nah, got to go fix it. Don't have time to go train and upskill myself because the plant needs me.
Yep. And Team B?
Team B, they were relaxed. People were upskilled. They were trained. They had succession planning, you know, leading hands. People wanted to be a part of Team B.
And so Ricky, just how do you go from Team A to Team B?
So the first thing that we sort of did was looked at, okay, well, whereabouts are the knowledge gaps, and how do we get that information that those key people have, Joe Bloggs, out of his head and down, and how can we put that into a way, SOPs or work instructions, so that way anyone can go through and learn that sort of piece. Making sure that everything is entered in the CMMS, making time to allow that to happen. Now, obviously, in a real world, I understand real world situation, everybody's busy, everybody's chasing tail, but the long-term benefit of making sure that things are put into the system, that the data is in there, makes life easier.
Yep.
And obviously discipline. Ensuring that, okay, you went down and fixed this. We didn't see any history within our CMMS. Can you please go, even in the next morning, punch it in so it's in the system? And training the trades on why this matters. That is one of the hardest things to do, and it's all about the why. The why in the long term is basically, if we put this information in the CMMS, we understand what's going on with the plant, the business can then focus on ensuring those things that are causing a lot of people grief and a lot of challenges fixed. Because if there's no data, it's running perfectly. She's running sweet.
And so, Ricky, I think you were talking about discipline, and I touched on discipline last week. And I think that's, again, it slots in really well with what we discussed last week, you know, in terms of breaking the breakdown cycle. And this is as part of it, is this discipline around your data. And because without the data, you really do not know what you're doing. It's really, like you say, you're really flying blind.
100%. Obviously, my time with that sort of client finished, but you could already start to see that improvement with Team A. And obviously also making sure that Team B worked with Team A and integration as well. So that way then, you know, people working on different stuff and they're getting better, you know, so yeah.
Well, thanks, Ricky. Thanks for sharing that. And all right, Ricky, so let's wrap it up give me in a nutshell, right? What is data management from A to Z in the context of what you just described?
Sure thing, Derick. So it really starts with A, making sure that any work requests are punched into the CMMS. All the information's filled out. If you've got the ability to do any kind of cause or effect codes or any kind of those kind of analysis, to quickly throw them in as well. That helps down later down the track. Plan, and plan some more. If it's a breakdown, or even if it's a routine corrective maintenance job, making sure the planners are aligned to what actually needs to happen. Go out and have a look at the job. Then, obviously, again, schedule it, who does what and when. And then making sure that we jump in, we close it out, we put in what we did, how we went about it, and what are potentially some issues that we may have found to try and prevent it happening in the future.
Yep.
And then obviously making sure the work order is closed out, so that way all the costs and all the information can be done. But also then obviously those kind of things will allow reliability engineers, planners, supervisors, right through to be able to see what's exactly going on within the plant at any given time.
Very good. And it also allows your managers to be able to see all of your costs associated with that piece of equipment. So just on point A, or starting at A, it's important to raise that request to the lowest possible level of equipment within your CMMS, because so you can pinpoint where you're actually spending your cost and not just raise everything to the highest level of crushing plant. Otherwise, again, you don't have visibility.
Where's the fun in that, Derick?
Very true. All right, Ricky, thank you very much. And if anyone has any questions around what Ricky just described or want to know more, give us a shout out, send us a message. Happy to answer any questions.
Thanks for your time today, Derick. That's a wrap for today's episode. What are we untangling next week?
Well, Ricky, thanks. So next week we are talking about phishing emails, and that's not phishing like in hook, line, and sinker, but actually spam emails. And we will also talk about labor shortages, and which is a problem everybody's facing at this stage. So those are the two things we'll talk about and try and untangle them and see how we can help our listeners.
No pressure. Sounds good. I'm looking forward to another chat with you next week, Derick.
Thank you, Ricky. And as always, to our listeners, if you enjoyed this conversation, make sure that you share it with your colleagues and join us next time for some more practical tips and a deep dive. And we've still got some amazing topics lined up, and we'll keep on untangling maintenance. Until then, stay safe, stay curious, keep untangling maintenance. Thanks, Ricky.
Three, two, one. Welcome everybody to our 4th episode of Maintenance Untangled. As always, crank it up. Join us as we can. That's a wrap. Derick, what are we untangling next week?
Well, Ricky, next week we are doing XYZ. That's what the script says. Sorry, I had a chuckle when I read. That's thrown in there.
That is so going on the blooper reel.
What's for next week?